हाय गाइस, मैं शान चाह वेलकम बैक टू अल्गो प्रेप। आज की वीडियो में हम बात करने वाले हैं बम्बल सिस्टम डिजाइन के बारे में। इस वाली वीडियो में अभिषेक आपको पूरा सिखा रहे होंगे कैसे आप बम्बल को डिजाइन कर सकते हो, कैसे उसका सिस्टम बिल्ड हो रहा होगा। ऑल्सो कोहॉर्ट 2 ऑफ सिस्टम डिजाइन प्रेप इज लाइव। अभी अर्ली बर्ड ऑफर भी चल रहा है। इट्स ओनली टिल टुमारो 17th of February। जल्दी जाके आप इसको अवेल कर सकते हैं। इसके साथ साथ आपको डीएसए प्रेप लाइट भी मिल रहा होगा ओनली फॉर ₹1 एक्स्ट्रा, सो इट्स ऑलमोस्ट फ्री। आप जाके वाला ऑफर अवेल कर सकते हैं। दिस विल बी ओनली टिल टुमारो। इसके बाद ये एक्सटेंड नहीं हो रहा होगा एंड यू आर गेटिंग दिस एट एन अमेजिंग प्राइस। यहाँ पे दो चीजें हो रही हैं आपकी। एलएलडी एचएलडी पढ़ाया जाएगा। एचएलडी विल बी टॉट बाय अभिषेक, हु इज अ गूगल इंजीनियरिंग मैनेजर, एंड एलएलडी विल बी टॉट बाय सुबेश, हु इज एन एक्स इंस्ट्रक्टर एट स्केलर एंड करंटली वर्किंग एट गूगल। सो जल्दी से वीडियो को स्टार्ट कर देते हैं एंड द लिंक इज इन द डिस्क्रिप्शन। द लॉन्च वीडियो इज इन द आई बटन, जाके जल्दी से देख लो।
Okay, so what we'll do is we'll stick to our core area of expertise, which is following the framework for designing Bumble. We'll not just try to solve the problem in an ad hoc way, but try to do it in the most elegant, time constrained manner. Okay, so like every other system design session, including Instagram that went live a week or so ago on YouTube, we are going to stick to the same framework, which is we will A, define the scope of the requirements. B, we will also talk about what are some of the most interesting challenges when it comes to Bumble. And C, we will obviously talk about, a lot of interesting components that we are going to be going through. All right. So with that being said, let us jump into a lot of our today's discussion points. And we're going to stick to the time frame. So we'll do design of Bumble. This is a high level session, so we're going to stick to the high level session. Let me share my screen very quickly so that we can start. So cool. So let's start. Okay. In the interest of time, this is what you're going to do. We are going to list down functional requirements like all the time. Okay. And before jumping into this, I'm also going to put a placeholder for non-functional requirements. So before I start, let's take our audience's opinion. Can you let me know what are some of the functional and non-functional requirements that I should define as a part of this in the chat, please? So search partner, user should be able to browse, accept and reject profiles. Good. Anything else, anyone? Matching with nearest location. Okay. Do you think that is the best way to match, Mohit? Or are there other alternatives as well? Depends on interest. User can share your profile with others on WhatsApp. User should be able to like. Try. All right. I've not been very active on Bumble. Is it feasible to search for users, or do we just go by left and right swipe that I know that it exists? Left and right swipes, right? So okay, so I'm going to discount the search feature, but it will be a good, interesting exercise to build the search feature as, our own version of the Bumble, as Subesh was telling in the future. But for today's scope, we're going to stick to the left and the right swipe. All right, so let's list down some of the functional requirements. Okay, so I'm going to jump back into the functional, and I'm going to keep it step by step. So the very first thing that we need to do is we need to have the user profiles that they created. Basically, user should be able to sign up, sign in, etc. This is not a mandatory one, but in the event of completion, I'm just gonna be, putting up this. I'm also gonna put up how do you, add interests slash metadata. What I mean by this is, so unlike, a regular app where you sign up and then you add this, you can also go ahead and profile what your dating preferences are, what your comfort zones, what your likes and unlikes are, etc., which is slightly different from what we're doing on Instagram or something. We sign up, we upload, or we receive images. Here the matching algorithm does depend on a certain input, so we are going to ask for it straight up. Okay, the next obviously is sending things about first, we should be able to view all the profiles which are going to come to us, right? We need to be able to see what those profiles are, and we need to be able to then accordingly swipe left or swipe right. So that's what we are going to do. We are going to do a feed generation for today. Okay, that's like the logical next step. Apologies for the typo. So this is the feed generation. And then we do the swiping. So when we do the swipes, okay, swiping, let's call this as matching as well. Now matching is obviously, asynchronous, or to make it simple, let me move it to a second thing. Okay, technically matching will be an asynchronous process that we are going to be sticking to. And I think if you're able to crack this much, we would have solved majority. The next step, which happens after matching, is messaging. I'm going to keep it optional because messaging is a very common feature. We have discussed this briefly in designing WhatsApp, designing some other apps, and I will talk more about messaging in general. So I'll keep it as an optional parameter for today, primarily because I want to talk more about the functional requirements, etc., and then proceed from there. Okay. So Pranjali wants me to give a short information about Bumble. Thank you so much for highlighting this. Bumble is like, a dating app. It is very similar to Tinder, Hinge, a lot of other dating apps. I'm sure you would know a lot more than I do in general. And that's what we are going to be discussing today. So what happens on Bumble is a user signs up. Okay, they enter their basic information like name, age, gender, etc. And then they get a list of feed based on what their dating profile and preferences are. And then accordingly, they swipe left or right. A right swipe normally means you accept or you like the person and you would want to have a match with them. A left swipe normally means you dislike the profile and you don't want to match with them in general. So that's what we mean primarily by this. Okay, I'm going to read the chat very quickly for non-functional requirements and some of the things which come up as Purva says low latency in reject, accept, or browse profiles. Non-functional is high availability and matching low latencies. Yes, Harshit, I'll explain what matching is being asynchronous is in terms of what we mean by it. Okay. And then are we adding super swipes or any premium feature like Spotlight or 30 minutes? That's a really good question, Mohit, but I want to build the core functionality first. Okay, so if you look at it, core functionality is the ability to see profiles and the ability to match. We are constrained by a time limit of 45 minutes, which I would want to stick to simulate real world scenarios. But going forward, we would, if needed, we can add a lot of such features. For example, super swipe, priority, visibility, some safety and security features like verification of a profile, etc., and a lot of other things. Okay, etc. I was playing around with Bumble a few days ago, and I realized they have added a lot more extra features also. But the topmost priority is first to get the MVP done, which is what are your core primary responsibilities in terms of designing the Bumble app to make it usable for an end user. Okay. Subesh, there's a question for you. Will you be providing recordings? I'll leave it up to you. Okay. Handling fake profiles or reporting. Yes, those are some additional good features. But I'm going to stick to the scope of this. And then if time permits, we can discuss very briefly about how we want to go ahead. Now, moving to the non-functional requirements. Okay. So I'll stick to some of the inputs which I got from the suggestions, which is, high availability. Let me put it up like this. So high availability, which would also mean low eventual consistency. Now, the reason why this is okay is I'm totally fine, if the most recent profile takes a few minutes or a few seconds to reach it. I don't know when they're swiping left, swiping right on my profile, etc. And thus that is totally okay. What I don't want is my app to go down for anyone and everyone. So that's where high availability and eventual consistency comes into picture. If I remember, Purva had added another input called as low latency. I do agree. The only thing is I'll put a number next to it. So I'll put, say, something like 200 milliseconds, which is the default stuff for going towards the low latency section. Okay, the other things that exist. So let's talk about scale. Okay, and I'm just going to make a random assumption. Let's say, I don't know, 10 million users. Okay, just keep my math simple. And last but not the least is, I'm slightly okay, I'll come back to what non-functional requirements are. Give me a minute. But last but not the least, I would not want, and this is maybe my personal call, but I would not want the same profile to pop up on my feed again and again, irrespective of my swiping status. Okay, obviously I'll have to swipe each profile that I see. I don't have an option to skip. So what I'll be doing is I'll either look left, do a left swipe, which is I'm rejecting this profile, or I'll do a right swipe, which is I'm accepting this profile. I don't want the same profile to pop up again and again. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to put it in the non-functional. We can debate if it is functional or non-functional in general, but no duplication. of profiles in users feed. All right. So that's where we are going to be talking about. Now, going back to some of the questions which did come up in this, what is non-functional requirements? Okay, so non-functional requirement ideally is, as the name suggests, right, it's not a core uh, ability of the system. For example, if you take your any app, okay, or any of this, the primary responsibility, for example, for Swiggy will be to order food or list down restaurants, or Amazon, you should be able to buy products. They don't talk about, how available you should be, how much time you should be, is it okay for you to go down or collapse or something. If you take a banking system, for example, up until a few years ago, there was a simple rule: you cannot transact before say, I don't know, 8 a.m. or something, and after 5 p.m. The same applies on IRCTC website, even as of today. Those things are not function requirement when a user should be able to react, use a profile, not use a profile, etc. Latency primarily means the amount of time it takes for you to return a response back to the user. Okay, whenever you make a call for it. So that's what we mean by primarily latency. Okay, so when you talk about latency, it is mostly no, when a user sends a request from point A to point B, it goes to a server and it comes back to you. This total duration is called as time taken to server request, or you can also name it as latency. That's where we come across as. Okay, so that's what low latency means. So Purva, I'm going to rely on your maths. I'm not double checking if 10 million daily active users roughly translates to 100 million users per second. But this is just a random guess. We can always increase it to 50 million, 100 million. Should not matter too much because we are anyways going to be discussing scale issues in general. Yes, Vijay. I mean, I am still conflicted if it is a functional or non-functional, primarily because I am showing, how the profiles are. If I capture it in the functional, I would also have to capture how I do my filtering. For example, I do want to filter my profiles based on my dating preferences, but that is a sub as a component which is implicit to the feed generation part. That's where I'm not, adding it in the functional requirements. I want the functional requirements to be something that is matched to a user input or a user gesture or a user reaction, something. That's where I'm leaning towards having it in non-functional, but it's extensively debatable. Creating profile should be highly consistent. Yes. Payment, again, so basically, you don't have to be highly consistent there, but you must ensure that if your reaction fails, if you're failing profile creation or payment fails, you should be able to show an error message back to the end user. You should not be doing double booking, etc. there, because that is gonna call this. Is auto scale a requirement? I'm gonna define auto scale because normally we benchmark our systems to, some things we benchmark normally whatever our current scale is. We normally test our applications to 5x, 3x, 10x, depending upon how futuristic we want our designs to be. All right, so with all of that, let's now move into the high level initial designing section. So I'm gonna move this screen up a little bit and we can keep popping it back and forth here. Okay? So let's start with two very simple users. Okay, we are gonna have user one and I'll put up a user two. Okay, the reason why I'm using two users is primarily for a very simple thing, which is I want the users to be, one user will be, creating the right swipe, and then the next user will also, be swiping right. So I need at least two users to create a match in this particular case. That's why two users here. Okay, now as we were talking, we want to discuss about profile creation as the first thing. So that's where I'm going to be going in. I'm going to talk a little bit about profile creation service, if I so call it. Okay, now this is primarily, about how would a user log in. You have two or three options in general. Option one is definitely, we can ask them to enter the email ID and phone number and password, etc., and ask them to sign in. Option two, which is slightly more cumbersome because it's not like a regular app. Once they sign in, I obviously also want them to talk about, their dating preferences, what their Instagram, some of the social profiles and handles looks like, etc., and then take it up from there. So we are going to be sticking to some other alternatives. A second alternative, which I know is currently in use, is something like social media sign up, log in through Facebook, Google, I don't know, some other app, let's say LinkedIn, because I'm quite active there, etc. Okay, so what then you can do is, if you're logging through a social media handle, you can also ask the permission to read a particular profile. When you read a particular profile, you can also always, get extra information about the user, which you would want to consent. Obviously, user is consenting to it, so there's no technical issues around it. Okay, so we can use both approaches. Ideally, to be inclusive and ethical, we should provide both the options. Users should be able to manually enter their email ID and password if they want to, or they can use social media login. The only catch is if they enter my user ID and phone number, etc., and sign up using the standard process, their onboarding will be slightly more cumbersome because I'll ask them a lot more questions in terms of this. So we can create something like a profile metadata in general. Okay, and then accordingly proceed from there. The next step, okay, and since we are talking about profile, let me take a one very quick minute to talk about some of the most simple profile things that I would want to talk about. So what are the profile informations that I would want to request? Okay, obviously the name, the standard stuff, the name, age, gender, location, because I do want to know where they are located, staying, so that I can give good recommendations back to them. And then, some additional things like dating preferences, etc. And additional metadata is what I'm going to leave it at. Okay, this is where I'm going to leave it at. This is used for providing more filters. I think good. So this is what we are going to be sticking to, the most basic, simple stuff, nothing hi-fi, nothing fancy. And then take it up from there. Okay. All right. So that's there. I'm consistently monitoring the chat. If this is so confusing, I can actually remove it. I want it to be very clear and distinct on this, on how do we want to go further ahead. Okay, but again, this is non-mandatory. We'll be talking more about, some filters, some phase of sending images on, low latency devices, etc. So I can't write each and everything. If this is very confusing, I'll definitely remove it. But this is one of the most important things, and it makes Tinder or Bumble or Hinge unique from Instagram or something else. So that's where I wanted to be explicit about this. All right. So continuing further. So when you have the profile generation service, what we'll do is we'll build an authentication layer, okay, which is basically how you want to log in. Authentication. God bless my typing today. Authentication API. So when you go into authentication API, the very first thing that you're going to end up doing is you will build, let's say, because I'll have too many requests coming in. Let's say this is a brand new app and I want people to be using it in the most effective way. I'm going to send this into a messaging queue equivalent of it. So I'm going to change the color coding for it. Messaging queue. Let's say I'm going to use Amazon's SQS over here to build this. Now, assuming that a user has allowed me to log in and use their social media profile, I'm going to have to pull up their data. So what I'm going to do is social media scraper. So this is what I'm going to use in the event of completion. And once I have this, I'm going to dump it into a database. The database, I'm going to change the logo again to make it look like this. And let's say this is called as profile DB. Okay. Now, which type of database do you think it should be? I'm going to take, feel free to go crazy in the chat, and tell me more about this. I'm going to take a pause over here. Okay. And also the reason why you think you should use a particular DB. So I see a few votes going for NoSQL, a few going for SQL, one vote for event-driven, etc. Feel free to go, feel free to spam more. Okay. In the meanwhile, I'm just going to chat a little bit more about this. Should we include profiles? Are we going to be doing capacity estimation? So Mohit, I have intentionally excluded capacity estimation from today because a normal question that I almost always get is capacity estimation mandatory? I wanted to set this example as one thing. No, it's not mandatory. It is always optional. It depends upon the quality of design and how much deep you're going into certain other topics for you to be able to complete it. So in the interest of, showcasing how to do designing without doing capacity estimation is where I'm going to be sticking to it. All right. RDP, MES, Mongo, since because it's read heavy and write heavy, since we need multiple Firebase, DB, NoSQL, SQL. All right, so it looks like we are genuinely, this is coffee, by the way. Okay, so it looks like, the people are conflicted. I think I'm going to keep it simple. Use mostly SQL. I don't think it's going to be very write heavy or so read heavy that people are going to be back uh, and forth going through it. People create the profiles every now and then. So worst case, if you just assume 10 million, there are going to be 10 million requests for, creation of profiles. And the only time when I'll be looking back into this is when I'm authenticating a new user. Apart from that, I'll use authentication tokens, except for the first time when I'm going to be validating my profile, etc. So I'm not super worried about it being a read heavy or a write heavy system. I think it's a one-time write, etc. that is going in. Okay. The other thing that is going to come in here is once you have onboarded your profile, we are next going to go into putting this data into another DB. Let's call this as the authentication. Let me move this up a little bit. All right. Let me actually drag this all the way back to keep it in line with some of the other databases that I'm using. So I'm going to be using a different database here, which is called as, let's call this authentication DB. Right. So this is where, okay, sorry, I stand corrected. I wanted to use authentication DB for my RDBMS queries, not the other way around. Okay, primarily because, so let's say this will be a SQL DB, which is, let's say MySQL or Postgres. The prime reason why I want to use this is it's very simple. I'm only storing profile information, which is listed over here, plus some user ID, password, authenticate, last logged in, some standard metadata. The reason why I want this one, and let me put a side note here. Let's say here. I'm going to be using NoSQL, but my reason for using NoSQL will be something different. Okay, so let's say this or DynamoDB. Okay, so that's where we are going to be using this. Okay, my reason for doing this is slightly different than what you mentioned in the chat. I'm not so worried about the scale still. Okay, the only thing which I'm worried about is the data that I'll receive from Google, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, whatever you want to call it. It's gonna be extremely unstructured, right? We are gonna be going through it multiple times back and forth and back and forth. Okay, so I don't want to put a structure next to it. And that's where I'm going to be doing, this. So with this, I think I'm done with the profile creation part. The only thing which is missing is the scale. So how do we bring scale into this discussion? Okay, I'm going to change this arrow a little bit. And I'm going to move things a bit here and there. I'm going to put one more box. Sorry. I'm going to be putting one more box over here, which is technically my favorite box. This helps me speed up a lot of things. Okay, which is called as the load balancer. We'll stick to only one load balancer for today, and I'll explain you why, but I'm gonna make this full pick in the interest of time. So basically user one is gonna talk to a load balancer like this. And user two will also be interacting with them, but we'll talk about user two's reactions in some time. Okay, so when you go talk, so when you go talk to them like this is how the interactions are gonna be. Okay, and user two will definitely talk to the profile creation service, etc., etc. All right. So now let me reorder my boxes up a little bit, just a little bit, to improve the readability part. I'm not very happy with what I'm doing right now. What the hell? Okay, I'm gonna move this up here. I'm just fixing my arrows in the interest of readability. Just bear with me for a minute. Pure disclaimer, I've not designed the system before, so that's why you're seeing a brute force honest reaction of how you'll be. Yes. Okay, so now why are we using a load balancer? The prime reason is we are looking at roughly 10 million users. No server has the capability of handling this because users will be uploading their photos, they'll be uploading a lot of other things, which we want to handle and stick to. So what we are gonna do is we will basically be doing something like this. Okay, now the reason why this is critical to go ahead and do this is because we want our feeds to look good. Okay, in the interest of showing transparency, I'm gonna be doing something like this. Let me also color code some stuff here and there. Okay, so this is my profile creation service. Okay. And now going back to the entire flow. So user one would basically log in or at least install Bumble. Then they would want to interact, with Bumble server, which is by creating the profile. Now, because we are looking at a lot of users, we're looking at tens, millions, or maybe more than 10 million people. We don't want them to directly go reach out to every server in general. We want them to go through a standard place so that they know where to reach out to. That place is called as a load balancer. What a load balancer does is they start with receiving requests from a user. A load balancer knows how many servers exist behind the scenes, and they know which server is doing what. So they'll send your request to the particular server. For example, I'm based out of India. Okay, I don't know whom I'll be sending the request to. I just know I'll send the request to Bumble servers. But the server can be located anywhere. It can be located in India. It can be located in Africa, US, etc. Okay, obviously, I don't want to send my um, request to a server in US because it will take a lot more time to fly there and come back here. Okay. On the contrary, if I send it to the most closest server, which a load balancer will help me do it, I can do a lot better job in terms of completing my response to a faster response latency, which is what we have been doing up until now. Okay. How many instances will we run for profile? Since we intentionally chose to ignore capacity estimation, you can take a rough guess. We are looking at 10 million, which is close to a few hundreds of requests. We can keep this fairly low in terms of the numbers of servers going down. The same thing. Kafka Adil is very similar to SQS. So basically, if you're looking at this particular screen, let me color code this up a little bit. This is equivalent of Kafka. If you don't want to use this, you're going to be using Kafka. And more, Amol, you can use an API gateway or a load balancer. It's optional. You can actually use both also sequentially. Depends on which one you're more comfortable with. Would serverless service be better? Why not use Lambda, which will handle scaling on its own? Primarily because it's my design and I'm welcome to design it however I want to. As I keep saying every single time, right? System design, there is no honest, correct answer. It's always about, how you choose to make your designs and what design trade-offs you make. Let's just say I'm not very comfortable with using serverless architecture. I'm going to ignore it, plain and simple. Okay, unlike a coding where you have to follow the same approach to get to the most optimized solution. Here, that is not the case. Here, you can actually create a design in whatsoever color format you want to use and howsoever you want to go ahead with. Okay, I'm a bit worried because I know I'm using too many databases here and there. So I'm a bit worried about what I'm doing. So I'm just going to color code my design so that I can, make it more readable for you all. Okay, do I do it in an actual interview? The answer is still yes, but only if I'm using Whimsical. If I'm not using Whimsical, I don't use this because I know other design tools are a bit more complicated to use. All right. I'm going to be really struggling for space. So I'm going to move a few things back and change the size of my boxes up a little bit. So this is how I'm going to be putting this here. Okay, so far so good. Fresher, is it good to join this cohort? Swatendra, you are more than welcome to join this cohort. I will be covering the basics as I'm trying to cover again here. But for a fresher, system design is a good to know feature. It's not mandatory. Okay, that being said, if you know this, your quality of understanding systems end to end as well as and because I'm also teaching low level design, you learn a lot more about OOPS in general. Okay, 2 months will be for system design high level, 1 month will be for low level design. So that's where we're going to be handling at. All right, so far so good. This is my entire flow, which I'll be using for doing this. Am I missing something? Let me check. So I have a profile creation service. It goes to authentication API. We put a SQS message because we want this part of the process to happen asynchronously. So thing which I'll be missing out on is, oh yes, there should be one arrow which goes from here to the profile DB. Primarily because I do know that my profile will also be read by a few systems in general. So what I'm going to do is, let me move this entire design down a little bit, just a tad little bit. Okay, this is not happening. Let me check. All right, so far so good. Okay, with this, the messaging queue would be Kafka, for example. Yes, a messaging queue will be Kafka. Let me actually put it here to make it, simple for everyone else also to understand. It can be Kafka, it can be SQS, depends on which ones you use. I've personally used SQS a lot in my past. That's why I've chosen SQS, because I'm super duper comfortable with it. As I keep repeating, right, it's important to be in your comfort zone, because if you get a question or a follow-up on what you are using this for, you can use RabbitMQ also. Okay, it's important to use what you're comfortable with. There's no right or wrong answer. Now, once we have designed, and I'm pretty slow compared to what I wanted to do. So let me go into the next step, which is so we have done this. Let me say that this is now done. We have stored the interest and metadata by scraping the profile. If I'm not scraping the profile, I'm going to be using it as an input. The feed generation service is what we're going to be doing next, along with swiping and matching of asynchronous part. Okay. Since load balancer is also a server, so how would it support 10 million requests? Abhinav, load balancer is designed in such a way that it is used to route traffic only. It does not do any intelligence of its own. Because it is doing very small amount of work, it can handle higher QPS, or load. If you still have a fear that, your load balancer will run out or can fail, which is a genuine concern to have, you can always have a backup load balancer, which is either running on standby mode or is running on round robin mode. What I mean by round robin is request one goes to load balancer one, request two goes to load balancer two. You can always go ahead and scrape. For Smriti's question, what is social media scraper? Social media scraper, as the name suggests, is it's going to read data for a user's profile from Instagram, Facebook, Google, depending on which one you use to log in and then come into this. Okay, so that's what the flow is about. Should I move to requirement number 2, which is functional feed generation and swiping, if we are good to go there? Thanks, Purva, for helping me out. All right, so let's continue. We are going to do something similar. We are going to build this feed generation. Now, I know this time I'm going to make an assumption that I'm going to, speed up my requests on this. I'm going to have horizontally scaled servers instantaneously. What I mean by horizontally scaled servers is I'll have multiple small servers, which will be taking up load of each of the incoming requests, so that I can, do a lot of parallel processing. How to handle DDoS attack? Mohit, can you remind me of this question later on? I'm trying to complete the feed generation now, and I'll maybe help you understand how to handle DDoS attacks. Normally, we use a rate limiter to, handle DDoS, but we can always discuss this at the end of the session if you would be kind enough to remind me on that. Okay, so feed generation service is something that, and since this is an API, I've used authentication here. I'm going to color code this also in the same combination. So a feed generation API is nothing but once you have signed up onto Bumble, or once you've opened the app, the very first thing is you need a list of profiles, okay, which you will be swiping on. That is called as feed. Okay. Now that feed is not generated on time. We always generate the feed ahead of time on certain parameters. The parameters will be your user ID, I don't know what to call them. Let's call them profile ID, partner ID. I don't know. We can call them something, partner ID, profile ID, something. And then some sort of a timestamp so that I can order my matches, or I can order my feed accordingly. Last active, something else. Okay, so that's what we are going to be sticking to. And continuing with, okay, so that's where we are. Let me draw this arrow for the sake of completeness. All right, so this is where we are going to be heading into. Okay, now what happens? Once the user sends a request to get a feed, I need the new feed. How does that happen? As I said, I'm not going to be generating the feed in real time. I'm going to know who are my daily active users. I'm going to generate my feed for the daily active users in advance. What happens if a user who's not active, say for a week or so, comes and logs in? I'm going to intentionally give them a welcome screen, or, a slightly longer banner, which, Bumble or something comes up, which is the app loading time. And I'm going to generate the feed very, very quickly in the background. So this has to be fast. If I have to scale this in comparison to profile creation service, I'm going to be scaling this a lot more. Okay, primarily because I want this to be going to this. Is feed generation service going to be some AI logic? It's not a point of our concern. We are not going to dive deep into how the match is going to be generated. Much more like what are some of the parameters you would be. The entire thing could be ML model driven, could be engineering effort driven, could be some other parameters driven. We are going to be limiting ourselves to how the end-to-end components will be. Okay. What if we need feed list earlier or some of them deleted the account? Deleting the account is okay. I'll explain you how we'll handle this, but we'll come to this further. Okay. So because I'm going to be generating this offline, the most obvious answer when it comes to offline feed generation, and let me change this color back to white, is, you'll always use a queue. Whenever you have to do any sort of asynchronous processing in your system, you'll always use this queue. So this is, again, I'm going to be calling, here I'm just putting SQS / Kafka. Okay, because we've already covered it. And because we've covered it, I'm going to color code it in the same format to make it more readable. Okay. So we have our queue. The message goes into the queue that, hey, I need a feed for user 1 or I need a feed for user 2. What happens then? Okay, this API doesn't do much. It just takes in the request, sends it to the necessary queue. The feed generation, which will happen in the backend, still is to be generated. So what we need is, we need another service which will be generating the feed for us. And I'm going to convert it back into this. And because this also has to be super duper fast, I'm going to scale this also drastically here. Okay, so let's say this is feed generation service. Now I use this color here. So let me color code this also. Is the color coding helping? I'm just curious. I know this design is a bit too much. So I'm just trying to. Okay. I was just going to say Subesh will do it, but apparently it's Subesh who needs to be promoted to practice. So I'll have to check. All right. Give me 1 minute. Let me promote Subesh to panelist because I don't want to be troubled with. All right, Subesh, this is where you're going to kill me. I don't know how to promote you to this. I'm not getting any options. Oh, I got it. Promote to panelist. Yes. Got it. All right. So now coming back, okay, to the feed generation service where we were. So see, how will we generate feed? I remember if I go by the standard comments, right? Few people say it will be location-based matching, which is one of the most useful features. I definitely want to match with people who are in my vicinity, or I would want to match with people who are most recently active, because by location, you may also end up getting people in your list who are, not active regularly, and thus my matching frequency would be low because I'll keep swiping, but the other user is already offline, may not even be active anymore, and then, they won't be the most recently used ones. So I may want to do it. Or the third will be something like an advanced filter, or a custom filter, in which I would say I want to see people only between, say, age of, say, X to Y, X being some lower number, Y being some higher number, let's say 25 to 35, who are, into, I don't know, reading as a hobby or something else, the additional metadata which I was talking about. I may be very particular about who I want to see in my feed. And thus I will always stick to those things. So how we generate the feed is going to be this. But let's focus on the first aspect, which is location only. Now, how do we query on location? One is, do that all geofencing, etc., etc. Or we can use a database. And I'm going to be using a lot of database because I'm literally trying to follow the microservice-driven architecture here. So I can use a database which supports location-based search, or geo-based search or geospatial data. One of them, which I know, is Redis, our beloved Redis. Okay. The reason why I think Redis is the most suited DB over here is primarily because it matches majority of my use case. Which ones it is? So let's say this is location DB and in bracket Redis. Redis has the ability to support high throughput, and location DB is something which will always need high throughput. Why? I'm not just going to be updating the location when the profile is created. I'm going to be continuously fetching your latest location through the app. Apologies for tracking you, but it will help me improve my recommendation searches. Okay, now how frequently, that is open debate. Okay, we can send it every 30 seconds. We can send it every 10 minutes, we can send it every hour, depending on this. I don't want to overload my DB, is wherein I would want to send it, say, every, I don't know, every hour, or every day, worst case scenario, etc. Okay, so that's what I'm going to be doing it. And I'm going to color code this also in the event of transparency. Okay, so far so good. Now what I'll do is, the way you will search on this is, give me all users who are, say, within X kilometer range. X could be 5 kilometer, 50 kilometer, whatever your filters look like. We'll have a default range of distance, and the user will have the ability of, changing that based on advanced filters, etc., etc. But that's how the feed is gonna be generated if I am using only location based. If I'm not, and if I want to use some other extra feed, okay, I can always put, additional. I can go talk to the profile DB in this case. Oh my God, drawing this arrow is going to be a nightmare for me. So please bear with me for a minute because I did not think this through maybe. All right. Let me see how I can fix this. Okay, so this is the best I can do. I'm sorry. Okay, I did not think this through before placing the profile at the top. I did not know I was going to draw an arrow here. But if I want additional information, which is in terms of most recently active, most recently, some extra parameters they were discussing, okay, age preferences, this, that, etc., is where I'm going to make a profile. Is this okay? Thanks, Smriti, for telling location is asked every time you open Bumble. That's also a good way. Every time you open Bumble, you can update your location. Okay, or I can periodically keep sending if I'm allowed to run in the background, etc. So that's some of the ways. Now you know why Bumble asks you for a location every single time to give this. The other reason why this is beneficial, right? To use a dedicated location DB here is, I may want to give you, and somebody was mentioning about premium. I said I'm not going to do it, but I'm going to drop a hint here. Okay, so if I give you the premium feature that you can, look for dating preferences in another city, another country, etc., you can just enable this location to be mapped to some other city in general, and go every time from there. So, are we using sync async ways to fetch data from profile DB? So entire feed generation is happening asynchronously, right? If I am, depending upon which user I'm fetching and what is their configuration, and we can maintain a configuration file for each user in some standard DB, I'm going to be fetching it. It's okay to send one query per request whenever you're generating feed, because you'll generate feed every time either the user opens up their app, like before that, whenever they are about to, log off, or when they're about to run out of the suggestion. So let's say we only generate 20 feed profiles, like we only send 20 profiles in the feed. Every time they go beyond 20, or they're about at 15 or 16 profile, I may want to send another request to the feed API here. Hey, I'm about to run out of profiles, give me more, etc. Okay, and then this. No, Purva, it will not be difficult to filter out because we can always write our queries accordingly. Okay, like I will maintain for some of the most important parameters, like age, gender, location, etc. The features on which I'll allow user to search, they will always be created in the form of a key value, and they will always be consistent. So it should not be very complex to generate it in general. Okay, so now coming to this, what are the times when I'll generate my feed? Either when I'm doing a bulk featured feed update, or if I've already provided users, okay, that hey, these are some of the users that you have, 20 users, let's say start. Now the user is swiping left, right, right, left. Okay, and they reach profile number 15. I know that now they're about to run out of the 20 feeds that I've sent. So I want to send this. Who will send this? The simplest answer that I can think is let the front end send it, because the front end knows how many profiles are there. If you don't, and you want to do it on the back end, you'll have to figure out a way to maintain a counter of this. And the risk there is, what happens if you send a request, the server crashes, the incoming server which is handling this, blah, blah, blah. You will run into a lot more complications. I want to keep my design super duper simple, and that's where I'm going to be using the front end itself to trigger that particular request. So far, so good. So with this, I've generated my feed, either with location or with custom filters, etc. Now that the feed is generated, what's my next step? My next step is obviously to store it, right? We want to store my feed, which I just generated. So I'm going to be doing that, which is, let's call it as a feed database. Okay, this also will be NoSQL for similar reasons, because why will this be NoSQL? Let me think. sorry, when I say let me think, I want you to shoot. Why do you think the feed DB should be NoSQL? Or if anyone wants me to say, why are we saving the feed? Sakshi, would you want to take a stab at it instead of me taking a stab at it? It will get refreshed. Yes, it will definitely get refreshed, but I can always maintain 20 feed for user, etc. Right? So I can always have for every active user, I can use 20 feed in general, and they build upon top of that profile. If we do not use a feed DB dedicatedly, we will have to generate it in general. You can, it will slow down the latency aspect of it. So we can, either do something. It can also be a Redis equivalent of it, and you can apply. Oh, Pura, yeah, that's what you are also mentioning, right? We can always put up a Redis and this. The reason why I think it's okay to use Redis over here as a cache or any other cache is primarily because it's okay if the feed dies. What's the worst? The user will experience a one-time latency. If I end up deleting this from the DB, right? If my DB goes down for the feed, I can always regenerate it. The downside of this is it is gonna be coming at the cost of higher latency, at least for the time when I'm repopulating my cache. Okay, is this feed DB unique for every user? Yes, obviously, every user gets their own custom feed depending upon their likes and preferences, etc., etc. And this. Okay, so with this, I think I'm gonna be done. The only thing is, now that this feed DB exists, the next time when a user wants to go this, okay, they will end up directly consuming this. Okay, so basically, if I have to put a name here, just get feed user and pass the user ID next to it. So technically, when a user will gen this, they'll pass a feed to this. This will be done. They don't have to go through this. The feed generation happens asynchronously. Is this DB sent to ML to identify the user interest? If there is any ML involved in this, first of all, okay, the feed generation service logic will be aware of it. The system design high level, you don't have to worry about how you're generating it. Okay, are you using ML? Are you using something else? Okay, you don't have to worry about it. What about no duplicates? I've not yet reached there. We'll come to it. Okay, we can pass limit and offset as well. Yes, we can, etc. Can we cache it and apply? Yes, we can. Why are we saving the feed? You know that to improve the latency. All right, so that is where we are mostly about. What about no duplicates meet? I'm just going to come to it in some time. Let me first finish. So see, it's important, right? It's important to complete one full path. I was having a conversation today morning with someone else. And the way I was explaining is instead of me trying to build every feature in one go, it's very important to go feature by feature. Why? Think of it as a college or university examination that we've all been comfortable with. You're supposed to get 100 marks. How do you get it? By answering 5 questions. Now imagine if I start writing all the 5 questions in parallel, I'll never be able to complete it, right? Fair and simple. But if you want to, first of all, pass, if your intent is to pass, you want to get 35 or higher, you would definitely want to get 2 questions correct, etc. Right? So it's important for us to complete one flow completely end to end, and then move towards the next one. Okay, and that's where I was coming at here. So if I go to my this, we have done profile creation, we have done feed creation. Swiping is implicit in this, and I'll come to it. The swiping and matching part, I actually will cover both of them together. And I think that's where we're going to be taking a pause because we're almost on the clock and I don't want you all to sit with me till super late. I think I'll cover a dedicated next session on how messaging services like WhatsApp, Tinder chat, Instagram chat, Facebook chat, etc. should be built together. Okay. So that's where we are going to be limiting ourselves to. Okay. So with this, let me see if I've completed my end-to-end path. In terms of this feed generation, gets requests from matching feed service, goes to this feed generation. They get their information here. Okay, this looks like it is done. Okay, the only requirement now which is missing is how do I make sure there are no duplicates? So it's fairly simple. Okay, when you want to talk about no duplicates, and I'm going to use a standard industry term, I'll explain you how this works. But there's a component called as Bloom filter, which we will use. The reason why we will use Bloom filter is it is designed exactly for this purpose. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this, bring it over here. And basically, so Redis by default provides it to me. You don't have to, build this in general. Let's do this. Because this is, even though this is Redis, but this is primarily being used for killing our filters, etc. So I'm going to be doing this. Now, every time the news feed service is going to be creating an entry into the feed, we will also insert it into our Bloom filter. What is Bloom filter? Let's take a minute to talk about it first before we jump into the next step. So Bloom filter is, a bit operator equivalent of it. What happens is every time you want to create an entity or, an entry into the Bloom filter, you pass it to multiple hash functions. Let's say there are 3 in this particular case. So the data will be inserted by 3 different hash functions into 3 different locations. Okay, without jumping too deep into it, what is the best use case or the advantage of using Bloom filter? The answer is Bloom filter ensures that, we get 0 false negative, which means you will never have a profile which does not exist in the DB which exists in the DB, but you'll get an answer that no, it does not exist here. So basically, it guarantees you that you will not be seeing a duplicate profile. The downside, it has false positives, and the false positive keeps increasing every single time your data increases. So the higher the data, the higher the probability of false positives. It's not too high that it becomes a bad thing. In fact, Bloom filter is used a lot across multiple industry services, but nonetheless, it has its downside. The downside is high false positive rate. False positive means a user, which you have not seen already in your feed, and you would want to swipe them left or right, whatever, may not even appear on your feed ever, because Bloom filter will say, hey, you have already seen this. The best example is, let's say I have set up a filter for Abhishek. My name is Abhishek. No, you want Abhishek to feature in a Bumble profile. Okay, but there are already some user which has, say, the name ABHISH, Abhish, something like that. Bloom filter may say that since you have seen Abhish in the past, it may say that you have seen Abhishek also in the past. Okay, and they may not even show my profile to you. Okay, but I think having less than 1% of false positives is better in the interest of low latency. The best part about Bloom filter is it has BGO of 1 search time. Okay, and BGO of 1 insert time. So it is incredibly fast. I cannot even tell you how interestingly complex the math behind this is, but how simple and easy it is. And because Redis supports it by default, we do not have to worry about it. We just have to make sure that every time we generate feed, we also insert this feed into our Bloom filters. All right. So it's not just that FeedDB will look here. The feed generation API will also be talking to this Redis Bloom filter. And I'm going to be fixing my arrows every single time I talk more, which increases my headache, but that is what it is. All right. So with this, we will be ensuring and guaranteeing our standard this. Now, the only next thing which is left pending for our use case is swiping and matching. We are almost 1 hour into the system. Let me take one very quick look at the questions that has come across. For each user, we'll be creating DB separately. We won't be creating feed DB separately. It will be an entry in the DB. Like the feed DB, 1 row will be for each and every user. We will not create 1 DB for each user. Okay, if that will be like too bad. In fact, now that we are here, let's talk about how our DB will look like. We will forever, wherever we are using relational database or many database of sort, we'll still follow the leader follower like DB strategy to ensure that we do not lose user information. The only information which I'm comfortable losing is the feed DB, because I can always recompute and generate it. But I'm not comfortable losing the location DB, authentication DB, profile DB, you name it. Okay, including the matches DB, which we are heading towards. You will be pissed off at me if I say, I had a server downtime yesterday, but I lost your match. And that match might be your potential, long-term partner in the future. You will be super pissed off at me and it will give me a very, very bad rating. That's where we were. So that's what it has come down to. Okay. So how do we ensure that, our database works at scale? We'll talk about sharding. And here, what sharding strategy would you use? Like, let's quickly get an answer from some of the folks. What would you use to shard? And for the folks who don't know sharding, don't worry, I'll explain within a few seconds. But let's give people on the chat some time to respond to it. Location-based sharding, all right. I'm gonna have my coffee in between, but please continue. What else? Gender based. Mohit, can you explain why that's a good idea and what are the age based? Okay, user ID hash. Satwinder, can you help me understand why age based is a good idea? User ID hash. Purva, can you explain me how that would work? Will that mean you will create a shard for each and every user? Oh, range of hashes for users. Okay, got it. Mohit, Satantra, any inputs? Anyone else who wants to take a stab at it? Okay. So let me explain. First of all, for anyone who is new to this, let me explain you what sharding is. So what sharding does is it's about splitting our databases into small chunks. It's like when you're making a big long trip, like let's say a month-long trip or this, you do not pack everything into a suitcase. I mean, you can be lucky to do it, but if you have that good packing skills and your selection skills, but mostly people go with multiple bags. Why not put one big bag and like everything in one big bag? A, it becomes difficult to carry. The risk of you losing everything if that bag gets stolen is also higher. And B, it's important, it's difficult to find everything in one freaking big bag. That's why we always split our stuff into multiple bags, which are easy to carry. The same thing applies here. When your database becomes too big, okay, it becomes very difficult to search. The response latency, which is time to search, becomes high, and we don't want our users to feel that it is becoming high. That's where we get stuck at. So what we do then is we start splitting our data into this. And as you read in the chat, there are multiple ways you can do, a certain group of users, like people in using A to say D are in one hash, E to G is in another hash, H to K is in another hash, etc. That's one way. Other is gender, because of quick matching strategy. As Mohit suggested, I think Mohit, the downside is you will end up having two very big this. Now, if your big buckets explode, it will become this. And your downside is if you go beyond male and female to the other sections of gender, you may have very small amount of data in those cases. You will end up creating a hotspot on one side and a very underutilized database on the other side. Age-based, as Swatantra was saying, will help them identify users by age and thus increase the probability of grouping. A brilliant answer. The only thing is you'll have to update your shards or partitions every year, which is a very costly operation, to consistently do this, even if you use something as good as a consistent hashing. The good DB implementations are to, as less number of times as you can rebuild your shard, because it's very, very costly operation in terms of doing this, etc. Okay, so in case of Bumble specifically, I'm going to be sticking to location-based sharding, as somebody pointed out. Why? Because most of the people that I'll be talking to will be in my city, most probably. And it's very costly to send, cross-shard queries. It's not unrealistically costly because we do cross-shard queries every now and then. And there are ways of doing it. But if you can keep the data within the same shard, nothing like it. Like it's exorbitantly good if you can find the data in the same shard. Okay, so that's where we're going to stick to location-based sharding. There is a risk or a downside. The risk is for densely congested areas, like multiple cities in India will be a hotspot, Delhi, Bangalore, Hyderabad, etc., and every other place which is heavily congested. Or if you do at a country level instead of a city level, or a group of city level, India and China would end up becoming two of the biggest hotspots compared to some other sparsely populated areas, etc. So those are some of the things which are going to be impacting us. But because our majority of the queues messages will be for a similar city, similar location area, it's okay. It's not very cumbersome. Okay. So we have completed feed generation. Now, the only thing now left is once the feed is done, what we are going to be doing is we are moving towards matching or swiping. Let's call this swiping and matching. Okay, I don't know what color to use for this. I'm just going to set it to white for now. So you send your feedback to the user, they start swiping. Now, is it important to keep a track of your swipes? Yes. Otherwise, how would your Redis Bloom filter know that you have updated it, etc.? And you cannot delete the data from the Bloom filter. So once the data enters, it always exists there. And this. So whenever a user swipes, okay, you already have your feed information. we can have a flag, something like, is swipe status, okay, or swipe direction, or whatever. Swipe status is equals to left or swipe status equals to right is good enough for us to know which direction the user swiped in. If it is null, that means they've not seen the profile yet. Okay, plain and simple. The only case where this can go down is I appear at the top of a feed and you close the app without swiping left or right, which I think is a worthy cause because you didn't take an action. I can always pop back up on your feed and hopefully you like my profile in general, right? So whenever you do this, we are going to be updating our feed database in this particular case to map it in general, okay, and take things forward according to it. Okay, so whenever a user swipes, we may want to go back and update it into our match DB. Okay, so like store, not store, sorry, update swiping info. Right. So I saw a really good question in the, where did it go? Okay, I think Purva had asked the question that users can change their location. What do we do then? The very simple answer to keep the design simple is you keep them in the standard DB, which they were in at the time that they had signed up. Because, it's costly to move users here and there. Okay, we can do a one-time cleanup activity. If a user stays in a different shard for a longer duration, you can move that partition here and there. But the probability of people changing their destination will not be as high as, the number of people using your app. So it's like a very small fraction of it. And you can bear with it for a time frame, okay, in general. Or you can always create duplicate entries because you're not duplicating your user's profile. You're just duplicating it into the feed in general of how you're tracking this. So that's where I'm coming at from. Now, let me link this. Swiping and matching. So we will update this. Now, what happens when you swipe right? Okay, you will obviously, for every user, you will maintain a match table. Okay, so let me create one more DB. I promise this is the last one. Okay, I'm sorry, but this Bumble requires a lot of databases, unfortunately. Let's call this as the match DB. The match DB, what it does is for every user, it will have something like, user one, user two, match underscore status. Okay, or it can also say user one underscore match underscore status, user two underscore match underscore status, something like that. Let me write it here for the sake of simplicity. So you'll have entries like user one underscore ID, user two underscore ID, user one underscore swipe, user two underscore swipe, and then is underscore matched. So these are some of the primary things that I'll put up in this DB over here, in terms of my metadata. Now, why is this important? Because I need is underscore match in order to initiate a conversation. In case of Bumble, it's also a mandate that only a girl can send a message first in case if a boy and a girl match. If a boy or a boy or a girl or someone else matches, it's okay. Anybody can message. But in case if the match is between a boy and a girl, only a girl can manage first. Does this have to be in my design? The answer is no. It has to be in my low-level design, in my actual code, wherein I will be making that necessary change in terms of who will. It's a simple rule-based message invocation. Like, so whenever I'm trying to initiate a new conversation, and how will I use a new conversation? I can generate something. So instead of saying is matched, I can say this is match ID. Okay, instead of calling this. The reason is I can then use this match ID, which is created across n different locations. Okay. No, now that I think about this, let me use both match ID and is underscore match. The reason you can always go back and unmatch a user in the future. I don't want to lose your conversation that you've already done. So I cannot go back and set the match ID to 0. Okay, but is underscore match is something that I can always go back and update. So I want to use both in my design going forward. Okay, so that's where I'm going to be basing myself up into. All right. So we have done swiping. You go swipe left, you go swipe right, you insert that into your match DB, and you also update a feed database, that which direction you're swiping in, etc., etc. And then taking it further. This only is because you want it to be entering into your Bloom filter and everything else. What else am I missing? Am I missing something? So I'm going to cross this last line off. We are not going to be designing this for today, but everything else that we'll go into. Yes, Meet, I'm going to be coming to the images part next. Okay, what happens if I already have the chat and I am to do the unmatch? So Paulo, we were not going to be deleting the chat from our server, primarily because, auditing, legal, other stuff. Okay, but we'll make sure that the chat disappears from your front end app interface. Okay, so that it does not come up because you have unmatched it. Or I may want to show it in a gray outs area or, archived conversations whatsoever. But I'll not delete the chat from the database unless and until I hit the chat cleanup policy, which maybe, I'll not store any chat after 90 days, etc. If we build up rules like that. Okay, so the only thing which is now missing, and thank you so much, Meet, for pointing it out, is where the hell are we storing the images? And obviously, Bumble is a very image uh, heavy app. And also we need to send this information correctly. So most obvious answer, we'll store the images in a blob store, let's say S3 in this particular case. Since I'm running out of space, I'm going to be using that here. Okay. Sorry for a little bit of chaotic now. I mean, let's just say this. Okay. Let's say this is images. This is S3, which is used to handle images. Okay. Now, if you stick to this, and because this is a file storage, but it's different kind of this, let me use maybe this color. Okay. And because. So whenever a user updates, it's going to be very close to profile creation service. Let me move this. Okay. Let me actually fix this. I don't want to lose a weak thread somewhere. So let me fix this up. So this is going to be becoming my S3. And the only time when I'm going to be creating an entry here is when I'm creating a profile and, adding this. I can always go back and update, photos here and there, but eventually it's going to be coming towards profile service. And since I'm now changing the flow, instead of calling this as profile creation, I'm going to rename it as profile service. So any update operation that takes up from profile's point of view will be handled through it. Okay. Now the downside of, putting this design here is how do I send back the data to the feed in general? In the feed, I'm not going to be sending back the image. It becomes too big. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to send the image URL in general. Okay. And how do we handle this? So I'm running out of time a little bit. I would urge you to go back and watch my Instagram's system design video, which is already available on AlgoPrep. I've covered this in detail on how, what's the most efficient way of storing images, which is not hard coding the URL in the DB, but mostly using it. And how do you use CDNs in terms of going back and doing it? Now, the only difference is when I'm looking for this. And so basically with this, and because I'll update it into the DB also for the users in terms of path, eventually you can assume, and I'm running a bit short on time is why I'm jumping the gun over here, but you can assume that the profile goes back to the end user. Okay, in terms of image URL, all the 20 images profile that you're sending and the part of feed, it goes into the image URL section that these are, say, 4 images for this particular profile. These are 3 images for profile 2, 7 images for profile 3, etc., etc., etc. And that's where we are going to be sticking to. What kind of DB is MatchDB? This looks mostly relational to me, the way I've done it. You're more than welcome to use this, but thanks for pointing. Let me go back and write it up. So this is going to be a SQL DB. Okay, we will also use a CDN, which I'm going to be drawing over here. Ouch. Okay, so I'm going to be using a CDN, which stands for Content Delivery Network. And basically users can directly talk to it. So basically I'll just say that load balancer can directly talk to it. Okay. Why is CDN critical? CDN is important primarily because it speeds up your image delivery. Okay, how CDNs work is, imagine, the central server where the images are stored in Amazon S3 in US only or in Australia only. But now I'm based out of India. So what will happen is whenever I send a request to get a particular image, they will also cache it in the nearest CDN available. And CDNs are a standard feature, like most of the cloud providers provide it, so you don't have to worry about it. Okay, so whenever you pass something to the CDN, it stores there in the form of the image which is uploaded. And then the next user, whenever user 2, user 3, user 4 tries to access the same image, they'll end up revisiting it. Because our database is location sharded, you can say that most of the images are going to be from the similar region. So it's most appropriate to use a CDN in general. Okay, so I think with this, I am done. We have covered high availability, we have covered low latency, we have covered no duplication, and we have covered scale because we have just horizontally distributed a server. So this is how the final design looks like. I know on a high level, now that we are looking at it, it looks like too many services, too many designs, and it's complex enough, but that's where we are in general. Okay, and that's how majority of the systems will be. With this, I'm going to take a pause.